Hello and welcome to the Sidebar, presented by True Crime News, taking you inside the courtrooms of high-profile and notorious cases from across the country. I'm your host, Joshua Ritter. I'm a criminal defense lawyer based in Los Angeles and previously an LA County prosecutor for a decade. You can find me on all social platforms at Joshua Ritter ESQ or at joshuaritter.com. We are recording this on Wednesday, August 27th, 2025. In this week's episode, a Northern California man is arrested for murder of his wife, who vanished last year in the wake of domestic abuse allegations. Plus, a Southern California man who allegedly fled to Peru with his 3 children after reporting his wife's disappearance is now charged with her murder and has turned himself in. But first, family tragedy in a Florida courtroom as the adult children of a woman accused of plotting to murder her son-in-law testifies against her. Today, we are joined by Alexandra Kazarian, an attorney and legal analyst you can find on multiple media outlets. Alex, welcome.
Thank you so much. It's so good to see you.
It's good to see you too. I've been looking forward to this. We've known each other for a long time. We worked on opposite sides of each other in the courtroom back when I was a prosecutor forever ago.
Yeah, I was at the public defender's office and we had a lot of fun.
It was fun. It was fun. I'm glad that we were able to finally make this happen. And I'm interested to hear your thoughts on these cases because I know that you follow a lot of them very closely. So let's jump right into it. Out of Tallahassee, Florida, the trial for a grandmother charged with orchestrating a family murder plot sat in shock as 2 of her children took the stand against her earlier this week. Donna Adeson, charged with plotting the assassination of her son-in-law, Dan Markel, faced her children, Wendy and Robert, in the courtroom in a very unhappy family reunion. Wendy, Markel's ex-wife and the mother of his children, tearfully detailed her mother's disdain for Markel, which increased amid the couple's divorce. According to Wendy, her mother was very controlling and constantly meddling in her legal doings through the divorce, even helping Wendy secretively move out and change the children's names. Adelson's estranged son, Robert, corroborating the mother's domineering behavior, testifying that Adelson had strict ideas regarding the lives of her children, notably exploiting her children who were more dependent on her. This testimony from Adelson's children was a stark contrast to her defense's characterization of the woman, who have portrayed her as a selfless, loving mother and grandmother. It remains to be seen what Adelson can do to counteract some of these damning testimony, but the matriarch is expected to testify, and we will be following this one, quote, closely. Alex, this was the first time in all of these trials, this has been going on for over a decade, but this is the first time that Robert, the estranged son, took the stand. And one of the things that he said that really stood out to me was that after the murders, while this was still, quote unquote, unsolved and police are looking for the trigger men, the family, according to him, seemed uncurious about it. They didn't seem all that concerned into trying to figure out who had in fact murdered the defendant's son-in-law and the father of her grandchildren. Is that something that you think will really stick out with jurors?
You know, I hate it when that kind of evidence is what's being used to convict somebody of such a heinous crime, because no 2 people react the same way when there's grief, when there's tragedy, and especially when you have somebody who seems to have been such a polarizing person in the family. I mean, I'm sure that in any family, there's at least one person that if they died, somebody would say, oh, thank God, this is the best thing that ever happened. So if you're going to use that kind of evidence as the evidence that that person was involved in the murder, then there better be some more substantial, real evidence that you can count on that's scientific and not just, I don't like the way these people acted. Because I feel like when you look back on these cases where people are actually found to be innocent, wrongfully convicted, a lot of it is character assassination. I don't like the way this person acted once they found out someone was dead, and we're going to convict them on that. So I don't know. I hope the jury doesn't just use that alone to convict these people.
You have such an interesting take on this, and I really appreciate it because we're talking about consciousness of guilt evidence, and I agree with you to some extent. Really what it is saying is, hey, this person reacted weird. Yeah. Hey, this person reacted differently than we ourselves might react. However, the law allows for it, and in fact, many times I think it's incredibly powerful evidence. Another example in this case is that after the trigger men were in fact arrested, Rob, that same son, makes the comment in court that he talked to his mother, the defendant, about it. and that she didn't want to talk about it. Now this man has been arrested. Somebody's been arrested, and she says she doesn't want to talk about it, changed the subject, and hangs up on him. He thought that was very curious and suspicious. Jurors, I'm sure, will probably feel the same way, but you think that that might not be all that appropriate.
I don't think it's appropriate. I don't think, unless you have a psychological evaluation of this person and somebody who knows this person well and can say, which nobody could ever say, I know that this person, if faced with this situation, would have acted in this particular way. And here we have her acting completely differently. I mean, you need to know what somebody would act like normally in that situation before you can say that they were acting abnormally, right? And you're not going to be able to compare what she normally would have acted like if confronted with her son-in-law's death. Everybody should be allowed to react like a human being, which means we have no idea why somebody's acting the way they're going to act. And I just think it's a crutch for the prosecution to say that person looks like a dick and dicks kill people, so she probably killed this guy. I think it's just very, very simple, and I don't like it when that's all the prosecution has.
Well, in this case, let's hope that they have more than that. I hope they didn't bring charges just based on that. And in fact, let's get to that. In a conspiracy case, and that's what this is, she's not being charged as the person who actually took somebody's life. She's being charged as a person who was involved in it and perhaps orchestrating it, maybe giving the order, maybe helping out with the payment of money. What does the prosecution need to prove when we're talking about conspiracy?
Right. Nothing. I hate conspiracy charges unless it's an actual, especially if it's not somebody who pulled the trigger, who didn't buy the gun, who wasn't waiting in the getaway car. I understand conspiracy theories like that. Or if you can prove that somebody actually, there was a payment. If you've got a video, if you've got an audio of somebody setting up a payment to a hitman, and then you can trace that, okay, fine, I get it. But in order to prove a conspiracy, all you have to prove is that there was an agreement at some point. And really, you don't even have to prove that somebody was part of the conversation of that agreement. You can all be sitting around in a room and one person says, I think we should go kill Johnny tomorrow. And everyone goes, And even if you don't speak up, if you're there and then anybody that's in the part of that conversation commits an act in furtherance. So somebody goes and buys a gun because we're all agreed in theory that we're going to go shoot Johnny, then even at that point, everyone who was in that conversation is guilty of the conspiracy if Johnny ends up dead. And it's very easy for a prosecution to argue that everyone peripherally involved was part of the conspiracy. And when you're part of the conspiracy, you get punished to the full extent of the law, the same as somebody who actually pulled the trigger. So these bother me. They give me a lot to argue, which is great, I guess, because I always have a job if these are being prosecuted.
Well, this is, I imagine, a lot of the arguments that her defense is going to make in this case, because it is kind of the most attenuated case that they've taken thus far. I mean, they started with the trigger man, then they moved out to kind of the middle woman, then they moved out to the guy who actually provided the money, and now she's seen as the brains behind the entire operation, but she's one more degree removed from the actual people who pulled the trigger in this case. So we'll see how it works out. One last question on this case, and I'm curious to hear your thoughts, because this is kind of a strategic move being made by the defense. The man who lost his life, his name is Daniel Markel, and many times the prosecution, when talking about him, refers to him as Dan Markel. He was known as Dan Markel. The defense has been referring to him as Danny throughout their conversation, throughout their opening statements, throughout their cross-examination. Now, the family called him Danny. But what do you think about their and I don't think this is a mistake, very deliberate use of calling him Danny throughout all of this?
I think it probably is a tactic that's going to tie into the closing argument, because they're going to be talking about their client, and they need to show that there was a loving, warm relationship, even though there's evidence that it was fraught with tension. I think that it will give them the opportunity to say, my client loved Danny, my client brought Danny into the family, and it humanizes her. It's less about him and less about, I think, characterizing him in a certain way, and more about characterizing her and the way that she sees him. So I think they're trying to soften what the appearance of how she saw him. If she called him Daniel, if she called him Dan, it might be a lot colder than calling him Danny.
You think there's any chance it backfires on him?
I do. I think there's always a chance of backfiring when you do something cute like that.
Yeah, yeah. We shall see. I mean, I imagine that they've got bigger problems than just what they refer to as the victim as in this case. It's a fascinating case, and we will continue to follow it. It's in about week number 2, not even a full 7 days in court just yet. So we will keep our eyes on it. Let's move to Los Angeles, California, our backyard, where a man who allegedly fled to Peru has been charged with murder after his wife's remains were found in the Angeles National Forest. Shayla Gutierrez, a mother of 3, was reported missing from her Lancaster home earlier this month. During their investigation, detectives uncovered security footage that appeared to depict her husband, Jossimar Cabrera Cornejo, dragging a large, heavy bag from the couple's apartment complex. One day after she was announced missing, responders discovered a bag containing Gutierrez's remains that looked eerily like the bag seen on the surveillance video. When authorities attempted to contact Cornejo, they say that they discovered the man had fled to Peru with the couple's 3 children. Earlier today, police announced that Cornejo turned himself in at Interpol headquarters in Lima, and authorities are working to have the man extradited back to the U.S. to face charges. Meanwhile, the couple's 3 children were found safe and taken into protective custody in Peru. Another case where we're going to talk about how people behave. His wife goes missing. Soon thereafter, he reports her missing, by the way, but soon thereafter, he, and this is the way they characterize it, flees to Peru. Now, would you characterize it a little bit differently if you were defending him?
Well, yeah. I mean, what do you consider fleeing? He went somewhere. He took the kids and he went on a trip. Peru's an extraditable country. It is an extraditable country. So if you're going to flee somewhere to try to get away from your crime, why would you go to a country where they will cooperate with the authorities to catch you and bring you back? You know, I'm Armenian, and a lot of times people go to Armenia during the summer. A lot of Americans that have been here, my family's been here since 1912. A lot of my family goes to Armenia every summer. And you hear things about people fleeing, or even people that aren't Armenian hiding out in Armenia. And I think it's so funny because in my experience, I haven't been to Peru, but in my experience, anytime an American or an American family suddenly appears in one of these countries, everyone knows and everyone's talking about it. And if somebody, 20 miles away says, hey, there's an American with, gray hair that just got here 3 weeks ago, have you heard about him? Everyone's going to know about it. So when you talk about fleeing to a remote location or something that's just not as, and I don't want to insult Peru, but something that's not as huge of a sprawling location as Los Angeles is. It sounds salacious, but if it's a non-extraditable country and you're going to draw attention to yourself, I don't consider that fleeing. Yeah, maybe you're getting away from the suspicion. You're making distance, but fleeing imposes that you're trying to get away with the crime, and I don't think you can go that far.
Timing's a little difficult, correct? I mean, his wife is still missing at that point, and he's already got tickets to Peru. A little suspicious, no?
Always suspicious when somebody gets up and leaves right after someone gets murdered. Yeah. Or disappears.
To your point, though, and I'm glad you brought this out because this kind of ties into the case we were talking about earlier. One of the things that they're going to attempt to prove in the Adelson case, and they haven't got to it yet, but she was arrested at the airport soon after her son was convicted. She was arrested at the airport with a one-way ticket to Vietnam, which is a non-extraditable country. Do you feel that might have more of a teeth to it for the prosecution than what we're talking about here?
A little bit harder for me to argue at a bail motion, for sure. Yeah. Is there any ties to Vietnam? Is there any reason she would have gone there? Stuff like that. But yeah, I guess that one would be a little bit more difficult for me to argue on her behalf.
Plus, I imagine if you're her attorneys, you're just thinking to yourself, why didn't you just fork over the extra cash to get yourself a round trip ticket? And then at least we would have had an argument left for ourselves. I
mean, that's one of the dumbest things that anybody could ever do is get a one-way ticket somewhere to a non-extraditable country.
Right. All right. one more point here on this Cornejo case. There's no autopsy just yet, but assuming that we know everything we know and that she goes missing, they find her remains in a bag. He's seen disposing of a bag, and then he takes off to Peru. So you've already kind of addressed the idea of people can leave and it's not necessarily suspicious behavior, or it can be explained. But let's talk about what if the prosecution is simply left with wife goes missing, found in a bag, and he's seen disposing of what is described as a very heavy looking bag in surveillance video. Do you think that's enough for the prosecution to try to carry the day here?
I mean, it's enough for them to argue it, right? But it's up to the jury to decide if there's any other reasonable explanation for that. That's circumstantial evidence. And you know as well as I do that a jury can only convict on circumstantial evidence if there's no other reasonable scenario that points to innocence. So if the defense can honestly present to the jury a scenario where that is not a body in that bag, and if it's a credible theory, if it's a credible story, I don't like saying story because that sounds like it's made up, but if there's a credible explanation for what was in that bag, then a jury is not allowed to convict. So that's the problem with the circumstantial evidence. But yeah, sometimes the circumstantial evidence on the other side, for the prosecution, really packs a punch.
Yeah, doesn't paint the rosiest of pictures for them. But very early on in this case, like I said, we don't know much about it other than he has now turned himself in. He will likely be extradited soon, and I'm sure we'll be getting more details in the days to come. Let's turn from one alleged husband-on-wife murder case to another alleged husband-on-wife murder case, now going from Southern California to Northern California, in Redding, California. In another horrific case of alleged spousal violence, authorities have arrested a NorCal man for his wife's murder after she disappeared amid domestic violence proceedings. Nikki Cheng-Saelee McCain vanished in May of 2024, days before she was scheduled to appear in court for a settlement conference. The case was related to an alleged domestic violence incident perpetrated by her husband, Tyler McCain, which involved 4 felony charges. When Nikki failed to appear in court, the case was dismissed, and McCain spoke to the media 10 months after his wife's disappearance, pledging to do anything in his power to support her family in their search for the woman. His comments didn't deter law enforcement, however, who later announced they were investigating the missing persons case as a homicide. While Nikki's body has not been found, law enforcement claims that her recovered vehicle contained signs of foul play, and this month announced the arrest of McCain. Though authorities are continuing to search for Nikki's remains, McCain continues to be held without bail as Nikki's family continues their rallying cries for justice in the loss of their loved one. Talk to us about, and I know you don't know, but I'm curious because you have a lot of experience with these things, why you think there might have been this delay here. Nikki goes missing in May of 2024. Her abandoned vehicle is found a month later. Domestic violence charges against Tyler are dropped in July. Authorities don't announce that they believe it's a homicide investigation until March of 2025, and he's not arrested until August. Why do you think it took so long for them to kind of piece this all together?
I mean, this is a hard one because you don't have that, smoking gun of him taking a bag that could have her body on camera. You don't have that connection of him to her car at that time. You've got to have him at least in the same room, in the same vicinity, within, the same square mile at the time of her death before you can really put your finger on him as a suspect, right? So they may be collecting evidence. Sometimes if they're trying to get, I don't know anything about the evidence in the case, but if they're trying to get cell phone evidence, sometimes it takes a while to get that. They've got to get subpoenas for it if it's not handed over voluntarily. So there could be a situation where they were really trying all different areas, trying to get evidence that would put him anywhere near the scene or anywhere near her. So, and they may just not have been coming up with anything and hoping for a break. It really does happen like that, as you know, where sometimes they just got to sit on the case and wait to see if something happens, if something comes up, or sometimes if a suspect makes a mistake and they give them that lead. I do TikToks all the time, and the ones that get the most views are where I'm telling kids, I'm telling parents, you've got to teach your children that they have the right to remain silent, because if they don't understand what they're saying, and they will put themselves in a situation where they will create evidence that may not even actually be there. But if a detective who's looking for a break in a case has a confession or something that sounds like a confession, I love law enforcement. They keep us safe. They put their lives on the line. But I'm telling you, there are very, very many times where if somebody says something that sounds like a confession, then the investigation will stop. And they will stop looking for evidence that somebody else did it, because they've got this confession. It's wrapped up nicely. And why would a jury believe that anybody would say something like this if they didn't do it? So sometimes detectives are just waiting for somebody who might be media prone to go out and just say the wrong thing because they can't find the evidence.
Talk to us about no body cases, though. How difficult are they for the prosecution, or do they have advantages for the defense? Whichever side of the table you'd like to take this from, but talk to us about the particulars and uniqueness of those types of cases.
I think there's always an advantage for the defense when there's no body, because obviously it gives you the argument that you can argue that we don't even know if they died. I mean, generally those cases are not brought to court because you need a corpus, which literally means a body. So there's generally enough evidence to survive the challenge that we don't even know if this person is dead. That's always the first argument. And if we don't know where the body is, we don't know how the person was killed, then there's always an argument that how do you know that this person who's sitting in the chair is the one who did it if we don't even know how they were killed? So yes, I think there's an advantage, but generally when those cases are brought, it's not two people who were in love and having the best relationship and having a happy life, and then one person just suddenly disappears. There's always that circumstantial evidence, and generally that character assassination, that bad personality evidence where somebody's just not acting right. I work very closely with an attorney who was representing somebody who famously was convicted of killing his wife. And most of the evidence was he just seemed like an asshole. He just seemed like he wasn't upset. And I think even today, jurors will tell you, like, we just didn't like him. We just didn't like him. And there wasn't really any other alternative that was presented to us. So we convicted. So when there's no body, yeah, you have an argument, but if there's that character evidence for the prosecution, it's hard to overcome sometimes.
And we'll let everybody guess what case you might have been referring to in the comments. I'm sure if they think about it long and hard enough, they might have some good guesses. But it's interesting that you bring up character evidence in these types of cases, because I find that it is also, even though it is, I think, a huge disadvantage for the prosecution, I don't think that can be ignored. That the idea that, one, you got to prove that somebody was killed at all. Two, you got to prove it was done by this person and you have no idea how it was done, is big chasms for the prosecution to get across. But it does have one interesting advantage that they don't usually have, and that is in proving why this person should be considered dead is showing their normal life, right? The idea that, hey, this person would never not show up for their kid's birthday party. This person would never not return their mother's phone call. And you get to call all these kinds of witnesses to talk about their normal habits, which drift into the form of character for the victim that you might not otherwise get in these types of cases.
Yeah, but what if, there are these situations where women just break and they're like, I'm done. And they leave their families, and this husband is left. I mean, that's the whole plot of Gone Girl, right? But there are actual situations where we have seen women come back and go, sorry, that little got out of control. I just wanted a break. And you have people who are suspects, and it happens. It happens that sometimes women are the dicks in the relationship, and they cause this drama and they cause this chaos. So how do you know that didn't happen? Just because who would do that? Well, who would kill somebody? I mean, it's the same argument on each side.
Yeah. Fascinating stuff. It's a case that, like I said, they just made an arrest, so I'm sure we're going to be getting a lot more information in the coming days and weeks to follow, but we're going to have to leave it there for this week. Alex, thank you so much. This was long overdue. Thank you for coming on. Where can people find out more about you? Your social media, your TikTok you referenced to us, where can they go?
Yes, you can always search my name, Alexandra Kazarian, but on all social media platforms, I am AK in Contempt. So AKNCONTEMPT. Not as flowy as Josh Ritter, Esquire, but
I'm sure they'll have no problem finding it. Check it out, everybody. And I am your host, Josh Ritter. You can find me on Instagram and Twitter at Joshua Ritter ESQ. And if you want to hear my thoughts and coverage on even more true crime cases, you can also check out my YouTube channel, Courtroom Confidential. And you can, of course, find all of our Sidebar episodes wherever you get your podcasts, and we would love to hear from you. If you've got questions or comments you'd like us to address, please tweet us your questions with the hashtag TCN Sidebar. And thank you for joining us at the True Crime News Sidebar.